Well, welcome everybody and welcome to our first tent talk. I'm very excited about this. Yay. This is a transformation from our town hall meetings. We're excited to be here to share issues that are really relevant to you, the tents. We hope today, and for some of you tonight and morning, that you go back to your markets and have more tools, ideas, resources, and best practices so that you all can be successful and move our mission forward. We know that children are the center of what we do. And through this really crazy pandemic, we've had to shift, pivot, strategize in ways so that we can carry our mission in short-term increments. As the world kept changing, and some of us are still a bit unsettled, I know I'm feeling a little unsettled sometimes, we know now in this time as an organization, we need to start reevaluating our brand, our communication styles, stewardship, and fundraising strategies. We are excited to have our four panelists here to share their fundraising strategies in this ever-changing environment. And as we get to start to talk about some of these fundraising strategies and share ideas, so I want to introduce our four speakers today. On our panelists today, we have Jeff Leba. He's the CEO of Variety Manitoba. We have Richard Spilg. I hope I said your name right, Richard. Chief Barker of Variety New Zealand. We have Heidi Muldoon, Executive Director of Variety of the Desert, and Steve Wakerly, the CEO of Variety Queensland. Welcome, everybody. Our first discussion to talk about it, and again, you could go in any order. Maybe we'll start with you, Jeff. What did it look like before the pandemic, and how has this affected your tent's ability to carry its mission? Kind of like a little recap. Paint us a picture of what it looked like before the pandemic, and then kind of what are you guys doing to carry out its mission?
I think first of all, we were fortunate here in Manitoba that things were happening in the rest of the world before they started happening here. So we knew something was coming. We didn't know what that looked like, and it's interesting because probably in about 2 weeks before things did sort of change here dramatically, my program manager and I were sitting down and having a conversation, and it was a great conversation, but it was a challenging one in a different way. And it was about how our camp was going to see about a 20% increase in our numbers for campers over sort of spring and summer here, and how 6 months into our year, our applications for our special needs program were already sort of pacing at double what the requests were last year. So specifically on that special needs area, we were sitting there having this discussion about, well, what do we do so that we can keep pace with this? Because, you know, we didn't budget for this sort of an increase. And if we carry on, we know, you know, it costs us on average about $1,700 or $1,800 to fulfill one of those requests. If we carry on and we don't think about it, we're going to have this huge, you know, hole in the budget at the end of the year because we're not thinking about it. So what are we going to do? What are we going to change to try and get as many of those requests for kids approved and get the equipment and services in kid tents? So it was kind of interesting because we were having sort of these change discussions before the COVID-19 pandemic actually hit us locally. And so, you know, since that's happened, like literally now that they've announced that schools are done for the year here, 17 schools that we run our dental outreach program in, all of that programming is canceled. 22 schools that we run our music therapy programming, the school-based programming for music therapy, and canceled. A whole school division where we run an adaptive swim program, canceled. All of our after-school programming canceled. And so we, interestingly enough, have had to think and switch gears right away. Well, what can we be doing despite what's going on around us to still continue to help kids? And so we've seen a huge uptake on the therapy side of the services that we fund, and a shift towards that virtual therapy services. And so really, you know, it's probably about 80% of the families who were accessing that before have therapies before have switched and shifted gears to virtual therapy, and the other 20% it's just not working for them. They're either maybe living rurally and don't have access to technology or reasonable internet speeds, or they, because of their economic disadvantage, don't have access to technology, or, for behavioral issues and things like that for their child. It's just not the right fit at this time. So, we're hopeful that we can continue to do as much as possible. And we're not making decisions quickly. We're taking our time making our decisions. And the one other thing that I'd say, I won't get into the details of it now, but many of you guys know that on May 2nd, we had our gala, Chase, not gala, Stacy, not gala, gala is what we call it in Canada. And anyways, and we were already close to 700 people confirmed that were attending that event. And so that was 8 weeks out that number came from. And so literally we probably could have been a crowd of, 900 people in a room raising money for Variety in a night. And we were honoring our dear friend Lewis, who's on the call here, with our first Lifetime Achievement Award. So we're very sad we can't do that. We're going to give him a pass and honor him next year and not select a new recipient. But in the meantime, we had to make a decision on whether we postponed our event or whether we canceled our event, and we chose to cancel the event.
Okay, great. Thanks for giving us kind of an overview. Heidi, would you like to share with us a little bit about what in the U.S., the Desert of Palm Springs area, what that looks like for us?
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. Well, it's great to meet everyone. I'm fairly new here, so I haven't met a lot of you yet, so it's really lovely to see all these faces and start to know the Variety community. So in the Coachella Valley, we were really fortunate at our particular tent because we had finished our major fundraising for the year. Our last major event was in January. We do a major bike giveaway each year in December, and we have a radiothon in November. So we were just very fortunate that most of our activities had fallen in line with when everything hit here, which was mid-March. So we've been shut down and mostly working from home. We're shelter in place still for weeks more, it sounds like, to come. So we're really, as a tent, using this time to pivot what we're doing, since we're not able to work with adaptive bikes and strollers as we would be doing now typically. We made a big pivot. The board chose to partner with our local food bank, Find Food Bank. So we made a donation and then also repurposed literacy bags for a reading program that we typically would have taken to our elementary schools at the end of the year as summer gifts for our kids to give them some educational resources. All of those literacy bags are being distributed along with meals in that partnership with our food bank. So that was one way we were able to take supplies we had on hand, we're ready to give out, and make sure that they go straight to the hands of kids who need them, who are out of school at least until August. We're really capturing this time as an opportunity that we don't usually have to really plan ahead for what does our next major fundraiser, which is our radiothon in November, look like. We're looking at expanding a lot of that to pull in other marketing mediums, social media, some television, and expand both the time, so weeks preceding an opportunity for a matching gift for our community to jump in, make a donation, and be part of a match. And just really, how can we expand that and develop that opportunity from what it's been for 24 years and successful? But what do we do now? How do we add value both for our sponsors who we anticipate coming in and the community as we're looking to the fall and preparing for the next season? Not exactly sure what that will look like, if there'll still be social distancing of some sort. But just really pivoting and really coming together as a board to collaborate and find out what is the need in our community today. How can we meet that still is mission focused? And what does that look like as we keep preparing and stay relevant?
Thank you so much. And Steve, would you like to share with us, Steve from Queensland, how to paint us a little picture of what it looked like before?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Erica. Really appreciate everyone being here. It's great. Great to see. So Australia is going really well at the moment with the pandemic. So our government put in place restrictions fairly early, around the start of March. And I guess we're probably, without getting too political, most of us are pretty proud of our Prime Minister and proud of the action that our government has taken. Australia's very definitely flattened the curve now, and we're sort of starting to come out the other end of it. for example, yesterday in Australia, we only had 4 new cases total across the whole country. So, the country's going well, but that's been the result of some really strong restrictions, social restrictions that have been put in place, and they have very definitely had a dramatic effect on our ability as an organisation. And Queensland's situation is very typical of all the states in Australia, all the tents, in Australia, in that we just, at the beginning of March, we had one of our major events, a $300,000 profit event. We just snuck in, and to the point that some of the restrictions were being phased in just as we were on the event, and we had to make dramatic changes while the event's out. It's a jet ski event similar to the Bash concept, but on the sea. And so we just snuck that in, which was fortunate, but people probably aware we had fires, etc. before that, so fundraising was challenging in the lead up to that. When the restrictions came in, they've been strong restrictions, so that it has decimated all of the tents in Australia, and I speak for Queensland very much so. Our tents are very much reliant on event fundraising, and we have major events. The Variety Bash is the biggest one, which most of you have probably heard of. So in Queensland, the picture before the pandemic is we're on track for a great year. We've been in a rebuilding phase for probably 3 years now, where we came from virtually no cash in the bank through to a really good position in the last 12 months. And we were on track for probably a bit over a $5 million turnover for this financial year, and this pandemic, obviously, with all our events, has had to be cancelled. We're probably looking about a $3 million. We're losing probably $3 million out of that revenue this year, which has obviously been devastating to us and to our teams. I guess, we'll probably turn in about a $1.2 million loss for the financial year on our P&L. But for us at the moment, it's not about the P&L, it's about the cash, and it's about survival. Mm-hmm. We've just tried to maintain our human resource capability currently, and so far we've been able to do that. It really is about survival at the moment. So we've had to reduce, obviously, support for the kids that we do, and we've had to do that dramatically, and we're really just trying to do support that is fairly cheap, I guess, to deliver, and still maintain as much activity as we can in that area, but at a low cost. And then obviously getting the story out that we are still helping kids, and the need and the urgency for that need, etc. So, like all the states in Australia, we have been decimated, and like I said, it's just about survival now. So.
That's good that you touched upon the kids and the mission, because we will talk about that, and I'd love to hear kind of some of the ways that you've transitioned your fundraising strategy to be able to support this mission. So I'm glad that you did talk about that. Thank you very much for sharing. Richard, could you paint us a little picture of what it was looking like in New Zealand? I know that Lorraine had left as well, so you guys are looking a little different now, but you're really surviving really well. So give us a little picture, paint us a picture.
Yeah, thanks, Erica, and hi everyone. So before the pandemic, our focus has always been on regular giving, or it has been for the last 5-6 years, on regular giving programs and direct sponsorship of kids living in poverty. Our focus before the pandemic, as has been the case for the last couple of years, was building that program. So we've got over 5,000 kids that are directly sponsored by 5,000 individual donors. So it's really building that up. So the revenues attached to that are around 3 million New Zealand dollars a year. And then we have one of our big sort of campaigns during the year is a back to school one, so that sort of kicks off in January, February, and that's generally very successful, and does two things. One, raises money for just cash for that we can use at our discretion, but it's also sort of helps increase the number of sponsors. So that was going okay, but we were definitely impacted, as Steve said, by the bushfires in Australia. So there was a massive amount of charity money that went towards that, and that certainly impacted our program a bit. So that's kind of how we were going just pre the crisis. We, like Australia, we're fortunate. We're a small island, so we were able to respond pretty quickly. And I think we sort of, in terms of our lockdown, we probably are a step more severe than Australia. So we went into this level 4 lockdown, which is the most severe. So the first thing we did were a couple of things. One is we kind of saw it coming. So we just tested that our 15 staff could work from home, work remotely. So we tested that before the lockdown. And then once the lockdown happened, we've got this concept of an essential service. So these are companies that are still authorized by the relevant ministry to operate. So we quickly got an application to our ministry, and happily they let us operate as an essential service, which meant we could still get food vouchers out to families. So we're a little bit dependent in terms of our delivery. We're a little bit dependent on what our delivery partners can do, because we work in conjunction with some of the big food stores, et cetera. So to the extent that they could give us food vouchers and they stayed open so that families could go and take those vouchers and get food, that was our immediate imperative. So that's kind of what took us into the sort of the lockdown. So we've been able to operate quite well from home. Everybody's been doing their thing. We're coming to a lesser level next week, level 3, which means more of our partners can open their doors, which means that they can start distributing sort of non-food essentials like beds, bedding. And as we get into our winter program, which I'll talk about in the next round, we can start focusing more on that. But our focus so far has been on food. And I guess in the next round, I'll talk about communications and what we've done in the media perspective and collaborating with others, which has been really important for us.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay.
So, you hear that expression, when fate gives you lemons, how do you make it into lemonades? I think that's the way it goes. So, Jeff, I hear that you did a great job of grabbing those lemons and making lemonade out of that gala. Can you share with us a little bit more on that success and transitioning into more of the fundraising now?
Yeah, thanks. So, I should start by saying, the gala that we run is roughly a third of our net revenue from that one event in the course of one night. So, we had to do something, and we chose to cancel and not postpone for a couple of reasons. One, the postpone to fall seems to be what people were doing here. Really, that's just playing with the budget, right? That really is just reforecasting our budget and pretending, in the case of us, that all that money is going to roll in Q12 without a lot of assurance of that. So that was a big part of the reason. We'd rather know what we have now and what we're dealing with now versus, posting a big deficit because we overestimated what the community was going to do to support us in the fall. And the other thing is, there are, in our communities, there would be in everyone else's communities, there's all those events, those standing events that exist in fall anyways, right? And so, it's not really fair for us to drop what we're doing and jump into other organizations' space to just split the money. So we decided early on it was canceled. The first step forward that we took was we took all of the sponsors and table purchasers and ticket purchasers, and the event is very corporate focused. So as overwhelming as, contacting 670 people might sound, it really wasn't, because it wasn't 670 people. It was probably 70 people. I actually got on the phone and had a personal phone call with all of our people that fell into that category and asked them, explained why we had to cancel the event, and asked them if we could keep the money that they had either paid us or pledged us, and call it a donation for the year so that we could still maintain the services that we can for kids. So, I would say to you that over 80% of those people said yes. And the next thing we did was we really, we dissected that event in terms of, our sources of revenue, percentages of revenue. So the next largest chunk of revenue for that event is what we would call our cause-related piece in our live auction. So not quite what they're doing in New Zealand, but the idea of sponsoring a child's special needs request or sponsoring a visit to go to our camp for a child, that sort of thing. And so at that point, we decided, what are we going to do? There's a bunch of different software platforms out there, and we can sort of do virtual fundraising, but do any of them meet our needs? And ultimately, the team sort of did a bunch of analysis and came back and said, well, none of them really do. There's this peer-to-peer fundraising program over here that we've used for events. And there's this silent auction item or silent auction software over here that we've used for events. None of those things really work. So I said, well, why don't we do a legacy build? Why don't we actually build, into our website the capacity to profile all the kids that we're looking to find support for. So, every one of those kids has got a story that's been crafted in a picture. And so it really is now switching gears, and we'll launch in early May with the next phase of our campaign. And that campaign will have an electronic component, but I can't stress enough how much, because we've even done that as reminders to people who haven't said yes to us on their sponsorship or table or ticket purchase being converted to a donation. I really, want to stress that even in this digital age, that there's that component that we need to put into place. It's the human component. So I can't come and meet with you, Erica, and ask you to fulfill your commitment or to be a Fund a Child sponsor. But I can send you those electronic e-blasts, and then I can follow up with you. So we've got a list of, everybody who's supported that program in the last 3 years. And as soon as we're ready to go, first of all, those people will get a preview email, and then the phone calls will start. And so my fundraiser and I, again, are committed to making every one of those calls and raising as much of the money that our gala would have had as possible. So the cool thing, I think, is the legacy piece for us is this is now going to transform how we raise money in the future. So, we're planning on launching early. There's risk in that. But again, if our goal is we still need to raise about another $200,000 because remember, we've saved all of those costs from not holding the event. We still need to raise about another $200,000. So if we launch early and we get partway there, well, there's nothing precluding us from sort of rebranding the program and relaunching the program a couple more times between now and the end of our fiscal year.
Great. So it's called a legacy. Can you?
Well, I'm just saying the legacy component, Erica, for us, we're building something that we're not just going to use this one time. It's actually going to change the way that we raise money here in Manitoba moving forward.
Okay.
So that we don't have to have 600, 700, 800 people in a room on a night always to raise that money, right?
Yeah, and I think, we say our fear as fundraisers, our natural habit is to put that fundraising is that true human connection, the component, those relationship building. And here we are in a position where we are now having to do everything virtual, so I think that's great that you still recognize the fact that there is that relationship building component. And as we are moving towards this new virtual era, that we can't forget about that. And now we're going to old school, picking up the phone, and nice long chats and conversations. Those are things that are going to be important.
Yeah, one other thing to just
Go ahead,
add,
Jeff,
which
again
supports the whole thing, right? In terms of why that personal touch is so important, right? Two of the phone calls that were made, right, outside of gala money, secured another $150,000 through 2 major gifts for us here. Now, we were counting on that money, hoping for that money, but again, all bets are off at this point. So for those 2 donors to come forward, actually, pardon me, three calls, 180,000 to be frank, but we knew the money should be there for those people to give to us, but we didn't know that for a fact, right? And so for us to be able to have the conversations for the donors to actually say, hey, we usually give you $100,000 and it's not until June. Would that be helpful for your operations now? Well, yeah, right? I mean, so, again, I can't stress how important that is, because these aren't, $20, $40 donors. These are, high value donors for us as an organization.
Thank you very much for sharing. Heidi, could you let us know, how did you, how are you going to getting your lemons, making them lemonades? I want to use that term. I'm coining that phase here.
Yes. So the big piece we're looking at is how do we add value to those we're working with how do we get them to come back to us again? We're going to be facing who's an essential service, and which nonprofits are facing a significant deficit, and what does that competition in the market look like, and how do we work well within that group? I think what's important for us is making sure that there's a value both for our individual donors and for our sponsors. So we're looking at how do we combine event sponsorships, how do we pull some of those things together, what things are inexpensive for us to do that we could really sell, if you will. One thought that we are working through currently is we have a major grocery chain here that came in last year as a new sponsor to us, and they verbally committed to twice the gift they gave us last year, which is phenomenal. But now, as we're looking at some adjustments with how everything has changed, what does that look like as we move forward? So there's some discussion of how do we pull that donor in to make it really powerful for them. Specifically, as we're looking at our radiothon and developing that and adding in some weeks preceding the radiothon as our big highlights, that particular grocery chain, we're going to discuss with them, can we have individuals also make donations directly at their grocery store locations? And so we drive traffic both to their locations. It certainly increases our visibility in the community. So some pieces like that, where individuals who didn't know about Variety will now have an opportunity to learn about them through a sponsor. So we're promoting their work and ours to make sure we're being a great partner. I think it's more important than ever that we really look at what do our partners need from us, our sponsors, and the community. How is it a tangible opportunity for them to give? It's really critical for us. The Radiothon we usually use as an opportunity for folks to sponsor a bike and a helmet that's given out in December. So last year we started a VIP opportunity for anyone who made a donation of a certain level. Those are things that we're looking at, those experiences too, which again may be different because of social distancing, but how do we make the impact of someone who's giving a larger gift and invested in Variety, how do we really accentuate that and make them want to return even in these uncertain times? We are getting close to ready for making an ask, and then we will put that on hold until the timing's right. But we're using this time to really, really dive in, think things through, be very thoughtful, and then be ready to start making those asks when the tide changes. That's a tricky one, I think, and we're going to have to explore that further as a board as we move ahead.
Mhm.
But we're going to pivot, and we're going to repurpose a lot of things in order to make it a value add.
I know a lot of people are, kind of wondering when is that sweet spot to start asking for money. And some of us are already doing that in our messaging. Others are waiting for that perfect timing for a bigger ask. Can you share, I think that is it the Radiothon that's coming up, or that you guys are putting it together? Can you share us a little bit more about that Radiothon and that specific ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Radiothon, it's in November. The big piece to that and having that be successful is definitely having matching funds secured in advance. So that's where our sponsors come in, our community members who make a significant gift. Because when we get on air for 26 hours and appeal to the community and to the larger public, what they really love is an opportunity to feel like their gift is extended beyond what they're able to do. So if they can only make $100 gift, they know that they can be matched either twice or triple their gift. And so that's very appealing to listeners and to getting a reaction from our audience. So we use those matching funds, and it's very important for the success on air that we've done our work in advance, and that when we get to those 2 days, we have enough bank, if you will, to really offer a nice matching gift to the community. And that's the piece that's important.
Right.
And that's where making our sponsors want to jump on board with this again, and that their businesses are marketed, and how does that look, and what do they receive if they've come to us every year for 20 years? What's new this year? How are we making that still something they want to continue investing in?
Sure, but also looking at that timing piece, because you're about right now at the time where you're gearing up to this telethon.
Absolutely. And I think that's really delicate depending on what industry you're in. If you are, well, any industry, it's delicate, but we know this is not the time to be asking restaurants, for any kind of assistance, but for us to be looking to them to see how we can support them. But other industries are doing really well. And I think there's different timing for different places, but keeping those relationships close to the vest and open for when the door should be knocked on is really important. We'll be layering all of those asks.
Okay, great. Love to hear kind of how that layering process works. And maybe we'll share later on some of the successes you've had in terms of looking at who are those ones that we could ask right now. What businesses are kind of those go-to businesses? Obviously, you made a good point of saying restaurants are probably not the ones to ask right now, but could be looking at your local radio station. They're still on air and they still need business, and there's free airtime right now, and this could be an opportunity to utilize that. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. Steve, would you like to share a little bit about how you have, you've gotten some lemons and fate's given you some lemons, and how have you been making some lemonade to generate revenue for Queensland?
Yeah, for sure. So we basically went into this whole thing with the strategy, and our board absolutely endorsed this, a strategy of maintaining our human resource capability throughout the crisis. So knowing that at the other end of the crisis, things will rebound and we want to be able to react as quickly and as hard as we can. And look, I absolutely put a caveat on that there's no point in doing that if we're going to be insolvent. So the caveat obviously is that we will still be able to survive. And if we have to move to the phase of like the other states in Australia have done, is in standing down staff or reducing hours, etc., then obviously we'll do that. But so far, we think we can maintain that. We wanted to be able to, like I said, rebound quickly, but we went into this whole thing and we had a really early conversation with our team around really needing them to fight like they've never fought before, for variety, for each other, and importantly for the kids that we help. Just fight like hell. And I think with that strategy, what I've seen is they really are fighting. They've lifted. They feel safer in their jobs. And their productivity has just gone from here up to here. So some of the things that we've obviously done is our bash. So that is normally a bit over a $2 million revenue for us. So we've had to push that back because it normally runs in August, and taking a number of months out of the fundraising aspect of that is devastating, obviously. And we're still not certain on when restrictions will lessen in Australia. So obviously inability to, all our borders are shut, so we can't travel interstate, etc. So we've moved ours to November. We've lessened some of the restrictions around that event, so the type of car that you can bring, and made it a lot easier for people to come. We've lowered the fundraising minimum fundraising amount that people need to participate, to make it easier, because obviously people are hurting, the economy's going to be hurting. So we want to make it as easy as possible for people to come. That'll probably see that event only bring in about a $600,000 profit, as opposed to what we were budgeting of $1.5 million. So a big hit, but we just need that. We didn't want to cancel and put it off to next year, because we know that people won't start fundraising until early next year for the event. So, and we need the cash. We need the cash now. It's as simple as that. So we wanted to get that cash in. So I think all the other states are pretty much doing the same strategy around that. We've also increased our dramatically, and this comes to that productivity that I was talking about we're getting out of our staff currently, but we've increased our applications and activity towards grants and foundations revenue. And it seems to be paying off. We applied just in the last week or so, we've picked up a $50,000 grant that's been applied for, and conversations started within this pandemic period. So obviously that's a bit of a risky strategy, because grants and foundations are actually reducing a little bit too, but there's definitely an opportunity for our tent to be doing better in that area. So we've really lifted, and I've lost count of the amount of applications we've put in the last few weeks. So our team is just working their backsides off to get those applications in and work with those foundations to try and get some money out of them. But the biggest thing we're probably doing is we wanted to create a new, so being so reliant on physical events, and particularly motoring type events, which have been devastated through this crisis. We wanted to create a digital peer-to-peer fundraising event. And we're about
Tell us more. Very excited to hear that. Tell us more.
Yeah, so we're about to launch that next week, and we'll be managing that for all of the tents in Australia, and obviously sharing the profit amongst those tents, on the condition that we can then, target people living in their states. So it's a fully national program. And I'll just put some caveat around the intellectual property on this. We don't actually own it. We've engaged a consultant who is delivering it for us under contract, and they certainly own the IP around it. But if people are interested in this for their own area, their own part of the world, then please make contact with me and we can certainly arrange it. But
could you let us know what that is called and give us kind of a snapshot on what it is and how you're putting together?
For sure. So obviously, people are obviously staying at home and not being able to access hairdressers and personal grooming is not probably high priority at the moment. So on the play of the term Bad Hair Day, we'll be launching Bad Hair May next week. And I can see there's probably a few people on this screen who've been neglecting their hair a little bit. So
be careful.
So hopefully people all around Australia, because there's been quite a bit of stuff around that on social media. So anyway, we'll be launching that, and currently we're trying to get some influencers and personalities on board. So people with big social media content. It'll be done purely through social media.
Great.
So it's the concept is grow your hair, facial hair, whatever it. I learnt the word hirsute. I think that was the word. Means hairy. Yesterday, that. But it's about let yourself go for the month while you're at home under restrictions, and then on the 29th of May, do something crazy with it, and get sponsorship in the lead up to that over the next few weeks. And we're trying to get personalities and influencers on board. We saw how one influencer in particular made an enormous effect on the bushfire fundraising in Australia, something like $50–60 million raised. We certainly don't expect anything like that. And this will become an event that we will hold every year. And obviously the pandemic has allowed us to sort of introduce it. There's no reason why that concept of just let yourself go for May, similar, you guys have Movember over in the, yeah. So I'm pretty sure that started in Australia. Similar concept, grow a mustache and raise funds for men's health issues in Australia. And the concept there is, it runs for a month, and it's now evolved into an enormous fundraising activity around the world. So we're hoping a similar trajectory with this over coming years. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We don't know if it's going to work. It's costing us $80,000 to invest into it. We've been able to negotiate some cash flow when we pay the arrangements around payment, etc. So at the moment, look, if we break even, we'll be happy, because the other really important aspect of that is that it's being shown for fundraisers that if you're not relevant through a crisis, you won't be relevant on the other side as well. Really, that gets us out into the market. We're doing a lot of work around showing the help that we're still giving to kids, and that's well and good, but to get your name out in the marketplace and still be relevant to the community is important through this period. So that's probably the most important aspect out of this whole thing. If we raise a couple of $100,000 out of it, fantastic. But getting out into the market, if we can break even and we're still in the marketplace and people still see us and know that we exist and we're still out there fighting for kids, then they're more likely to support us on the other side when the economy rebounds and the pandemic's over.
That is so true. Now, Steve, I mean, $80,000 is kind of a sticker shock for some of our tents. And it's a big gulp when I say it, hear it too.
And for us too, let me tell
Oh,
you.
good, good. I'm glad we're all on the same page.
It's a big risk. I'm not sleeping until we break even, don't you worry.
Right, right. Do you find that the money's, I mean, could you break down kind of what benefits are you getting out of that, out of your money? Not to put you on a spot, but is it you're getting maybe some celebrity help? They're doing all your social media. I mean, what are they offsetting to support?
Yeah.
Could you share that a little bit with us to kind of break that down? Because if we want to take that concept and do it in our own market, we will definitely, for those who don't really have a big cash flow, but I kind of have to think about what are the things that we could do and what we can't do and how we could, you know, do it so it could work in our market, because it's a great idea. It's a great concept.
Yeah, for sure. And just stressing that IP, it's just needs to come through us if we may. But
Sure, we'll definitely go
kill
to you
me.
first. Thank you.
Yeah, they'll kill me if it turns up in Canada or something.
Okay, no problem.
But a big portion of that is Facebook marketing.
Okay.
So I think from memory that's around $25,000.
Mhm.
I have the budget in front of me, but from memory it's around $25,000 investment into Facebook ads. So that will get it out into on people's screens. There are other consultant fees and setting up of fundraising pages, etc. So it can definitely be scaled down, although the effect will probably lessen. I think where probably the biggest opportunity lies is if you've got a social media, someone involved in your tent who has a really big social media following, and if you can get on board and get them doing it and then pushing it out, that's going to save, could save big amounts of money on having to advertise and having to, and obviously create a greater return on your investment, to be honest. So,
Great. Thank you so much for breaking that down. That's really helpful. And you're launching May, right?
1st of May, yeah. And we're currently trying to negotiate with local personalities around getting on board for the launch next week. So, and there'll be a teaser going out in the next week. So if you can certainly follow it on Variety Queensland's Facebook page, it'll be on there. That'll be the main platform that it goes out through. So if anyone wants to follow that, Variety, the Children's Charity of Queensland.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Richard, I was asking everybody is, you get a bag of lemons. How are you guys making your lemonade? What are you doing generate revenue in this time to move the mission forward?
Yeah. So we were a little bit lucky in the sense that we just had one big event in a year, which doesn't generate a huge profit, maybe 50,000 New Zealand dollars, but more than that gets 300 odd people together, and the focus is always on a particular campaign or converting them to KiwiKid sponsors, the regular giving thing. So that's in July. We took an early call because it's dependent on selling tickets and tables and stuff, that nobody was going to be that keen. So we postponed that till next year. So that was the sort of early thing. And then we're definitely looking at virtual events. We've been speaking to Steve. Unfortunately, that concept didn't really work for us. Again, Steve talked about, having people with big sort of social media followings and that. So for us, the return on investment didn't look compelling. But also it's a bit premature. We've obviously, we've got lots on our plate. So it's just also focusing on our priorities at the moment. So I'll just deal with staff first, because I think that's been really important for us, is just making sure they have everything they need to work from home, that they're feeling safe. We're communicating with them. So we did a quick survey after 3 weeks of them working remotely. Just got the feedback. So I think that's been a really important one. Just keeping in touch with them, keeping the spirits up, making sure they're all engaged, and where they've got maybe less to do, that they sort of help the other teams. So that's been great. And I think as Jeff and or Heidi and or Steve said, our staff have really come to the fore here with the way they're working. And the fact is, we're not going to get back to life the way it was before. So remote working is something we're going to have to incorporate in our policies from now on, for sure. So getting to the fundraising. Our view was this wasn't the time to be coy about it. One of the challenges we've got in New Zealand is, as a country, as a small country, we've got lots going for us. And people are sort of shocked when we try and get the message that 1 in 4 kids live in poverty here. And you get a lot of pushback to say, well, that's not, it's just not right, but it is right. So one of our things has always been to get that message out.
Mhm.
So we've been quite aggressive in terms of trying to do that. And in terms of, so we started off quite quickly with our first emergency appeal. And that was, as I said earlier, was focused on food, because we know that was an immediate need for the families on our programs.
Mhm.
So our first call was to existing sponsors, the sort of 4,500 sponsors that we've got sponsoring the 5,000 kids, asking for cash for groceries. And in response to that, we got about 15% of those regular donors then gave more.
Mhm.
And we raised about 80,000 New Zealand dollars from that, and that we turned that into help in terms of grocery vouchers for about 500 families currently on our program. So that was the first thing. Then we took those stories, because what we try and do is feedback to donors is hugely important, thanking and making sure we're keeping in touch with them, but equally just getting responses from the families we help and their stories. So the next phase was taking those stories and converting them into the next appeal, which is a more general appeal, just for sort of cash,
Mhm.
to anyone on our database. And that raised another 80,000. And then,
I'm sorry, you said it raised $80,000, if I can say?
Yeah. So in total from our emergency appeals, since we started, so call that, we've been going for a month now, I guess.
Mhm.
And in phases, we've raised about 160,000 New Zealand dollars, just in terms of our emergency appeals. So again, a combination of people that are current regular givers, and then new donors. And then just really through that, and then through, sharing stuff on Facebook, etc., on Google, whatever, we've just got these sort of one-off, fairly sizable donations from people we've never had anything to do with before. So the coverage in all this has been really important.
Mhm.
Then we've also focused on our corporate relationships, and some of them do stuff in kind for us. So we've got one of the telecoms companies that where we've got families who haven't got broadband, for argument's sake. They help us get broadband to those families, because obviously kids are homeschooling, and they can have the digital device, but if they haven't got broadband, that doesn't really help. So we get a lot of that in kind from some of our sponsors, but we've got this amazing relationship with Zurich Insurance, and through them locally, their foundation in Zurich. So they've been really generous in terms of funding some programs, and they really out the blue, they called me and said, what else can we do? And can we give you another $100,000? So we got that. So in total, we've got about close to 300,000 from our appeals and our connections.
Mhm.
And what we've done is then convert that again to a combination of the families already on our programs, where we know there's just heartbreaking stories coming through, and we're looking at giving special grants to those. And then we've got 400 family kids on our waiting list for sponsorship. So through one of the collaborations with a crowd here called Eat My Lunch, so they basically, their model is that companies, typically in normal times, companies buy lunches from them, and for every lunch that the company buys, they donate a lunch to a kid on their program. So it's sort of like for like stuff. So we've collaborated with them and Zurich and Fonterra, one of our big dairy company, who've donated about 4,000 cartons of milk. And we've converted, again, about 40,000 of that money that we've raised into care boxes for 200 of the kids on our waiting list now. So these are kids that aren't currently sponsored, but we're actually reaching out to them and giving them help.
Mhm.
So to those 200 families, we're giving them sort of 2 care boxes each. And then to 200 other families who live in more rural areas, we're giving them $200 worth of grocery vouchers.
Mhm.
So again, with everything we do, we then create stories, and that gives us fuel for the next campaign.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what I'm hearing a lot of, is the messaging is really important, and you have been putting some really good, thoughtful messaging behind your fundraising ask.
So yeah, so we've as I said, just going back to the start, we just thought this isn't time to be coy about this, but trying to do it in a thoughtful way. And then importantly, going back to people who've donated, saying thank you, telling them about the impact. And I don't think we've seen you. I haven't sent any of that through yet. But telling them about the positive impact that's had, the reaction people have got from receiving stuff they really didn't expect to get, and then asking them if they can help more. Again, just not being shy about it, because if ever there was a time, this is it.
Yeah, it's great.
So talking about the impact has been really, that's the next thing, because we're getting real stories, but there's a sort of balance between the heartbreaking story and the just amazing response to, again, somebody that's received some help and the thank you attached to that.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
there's
sort of
always a
combination of
call.
that.
I notice there's always a call to action to fundraise.
Yep,
I
totally.
think that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind, that even if we are doing soft touches, that there's always a CTA to that fundraising effort.
Yeah. So what we've also done is, because again, we pride ourselves in, with our regular donors, our commitment to them is that at least 75% of their donation will go to the cause. So, then looking at our organization and just making sure we've covered ourselves, covered our overheads, etc. So that's also been an important part of what we've been doing, just doing all the sensitivities around cash flow, just making sure that staff understand where we are, that they're okay for the time being, we're okay for the time being, but that, and we'll look at saving costs where we can. And that was another thing, I think, Steve mentioned it, foundations, grants, just making sure we're reaching out to all those foundations and grant programs that are specifically looking at helping out, and just going to all of them and getting funding from them. And then segmenting our data, but just making sure, and that's been a good lesson as well, just making sure that our database is accurate, that we are reaching all the people we need to, that, if we're looking at buying new databases to expand our reach, that, we're segmenting properly, all that. But again, going back to the sort of cash flow, doing all sorts of scenario analysis, if we, if revenues sort of income fell off a cliff, what could we sustain? And just, touch wood, being okay, just getting that message to staff so they feel secure and they just can get on with doing the good work they're doing without sort of fear of losing jobs or salaries being reduced, etc.
Thank you for letting us know about that. Jeff, our Heidi, or even Steve, is there any key messages you would say that's important for us to really focus on when we're going through some of our virtual fundraising? Some key wordings, key messaging, something that's been really successful that you've found and while you've kind of switched over to this virtual fundraising world?
I mean, from our perspective in Manitoba, for sure, that whole idea of match or incentive for people has been a significant piece of it, creating urgency. So, I like what you're doing in New Zealand, Richard, like that whole idea that the families we help, these are families that experience economic disadvantage at the best of times, and clearly this isn't the best of times. So they are going to be families that are the hardest hit as a result of what's going on. So it's that, to me, it's incentive and urgency, right? And timing, right? Like these appeals need to take advantage of that matching component. Like we're running one right now. It expires at the end of the month. And then when we launch the next piece of the campaign, we'll have other challenges and matches built into it. Sort of like what Heidi was talking about with their radiothon, right? Again, getting those phone calls made and securing those dollars ahead of time to be able to actually then leverage that support from the community. So to me, that's it, and have a voice, right? Like, I think at least, the decision here is like the last thing in the world we want to do. We want to be thoughtful. We don't want to be over the top, but we don't want to go silent because, again, I'm not sure whether it was Richard or Steve that mentioned that, when we come out of this on the other end, we're going to be further ahead. We're going to be able to respond quicker and resume, whatever the new normal looks like. Way better if we've been active and we have a voice, during these times that aren't so pleasant.
That's great. Heidi, do you have anything to add, or Steve?
Yeah, Jeff, I totally agree. And Richard, Steve, with all of you, absolutely, this is not the time to be silent. And as we explore how it looks as we move forward, we have to think about how our messaging today is positioning ourselves for a future ask, or one next week, or beginning May 1st. And I think here for us too, partnering with other agencies that are meeting immediate and essential needs that we weren't already has been very helpful for us to remain relevant, remain top of mind, and continue to have that place where we're truly making an impact and looking for what are the essential needs of our community and how can we as Variety maintain our mission and meet those in partnership with other organizations that have a different capacity but need our support and our help. And what does that look like? How do we not duplicate things that are already happening, but how do we promote both Variety's name and our position and meet those needs?
Steve?
Yeah, all of that. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And everyone's sort of spoken about it. And just that staying relevant in the marketplace. Is so important now, so that we're still relevant after it. So,
Go ahead, Steve.
Is this where you wanted us to talk about lessons learned, or?
Yeah, I'm going to transition to that.
Okay. I'll wait then.
Here's my transition.
Because we've learned a few.
Hey, don't worry, Steve. I had the same thought going through my head.
Say, this was my transition. Ready for it, everybody?
There's so many lessons.
As we are talking about our relevance and how relevant we need to be, and I think you captured that really, and that's very important. As we've gone through this, and I'm going to make sure I say it correctly, as we've gone through understanding what this new world or new norm looks like, is there anything you've discovered or learned throughout this experience that might be helpful to other tents? Kind of what are our lesson learned from this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of jotted down a couple of things, but the first one being just so important to focus on your team's well-being. And like we've spoken about our strategy of keeping them all on and maintaining our human resource capability, but for as long as we can. But by doing that, I've really seen a lift in their level of intensity and their lift in their fight and a lift in their productivity. And without a doubt, if we hadn't have done that, there's no way in this world we could have put any thought into launching a new peer-to-peer digital fundraising event. It just wouldn't have been possible. And in fact, the initial plan with the other tents in Australia was to get everyone on board and share the responsibility and the investment. And one of the biggest issues that we came up against in being able to do that was the other tents didn't have that human resource capability, unfortunately, to be able to support the campaign to the level that it will need that human support. So the fact that we are still at full capability meant that we could actually go and deliver that on their behalf, and then obviously support the tents through and distributing the profit. So we've worn the risk, we've worn the work on it, and we'll go out and help and distribute the profits amongst the Australian tents based on the normal arrangement that we have for national campaigns in Australia. So, but the other big thing, and probably the most important lesson out of this whole COVID-19 pandemic, is just the importance on diversification of revenue. So I know for a fact our board has been talking about the risk of being so reliant on the Variety Bash and motoring events for at least 20 years. And nobody in that period has actually actioned that diversifying of our revenue. And we started the process 2 years ago, knowing that the importance of it. But you know, we're only 2 years into that. We've now got a regular giving campaign. We've now got more diverse events. We've now got a growing individual giving campaign, revenue sources. But we're only 2 years down the track, and we needed to be 10 years down the track to insure ourselves against a crisis exactly like we're going through now. So I just wish it would started 10 years ago, if not 20 years ago when they first started talking about it. So it's my biggest thing there is diversification. And if your board is talking about diversifying, stop talking about it and actually do it, because this has really highlighted to us just how devastating it has decimated every tent in Australia. And some of us, including Queensland, are on the brink of insolvency and disappearing. And the only people who suffer from that, apart from our people, is the kids. And that's just not right. So
yeah, absolutely.
Diversification.
That's great. Thank you so much, Steve. Jeff, do you have anything to add in regards to lesson learned from this?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things, I think. So I agree wholeheartedly with Steve on the staffing piece. We made the decision early on that we wanted to keep our staff engaged and not do layoffs or anything like that. We're fortunate that the country we live in was very proactive in their approach to keeping employees with employers, and so there's been some great incentive there. And it's that hot water tap, right? You turn the hot water tap on, and what do you get? Cold water, and you got to wait for the hot water to warm up, right? So when we come out on the other end, we want the water, the minute we turn that tap on, to still be hot. So there's lots of work that that we can't get to as a small tent on a day-to-day basis. So that's been part of the team's focus as well as catch up. I'm not going to lie for a second and say the team dynamics haven't shifted and it's not challenging in its own way to work remotely. It certainly is, but the commitment level from our team, and I agree with Steve, the productivity level from our team has been phenomenal over the period of time that we've had to work remotely. So that's one. The other is, in 21 or 22 years, whatever it's been that I've worked in nonprofit now, certainly no event has looked like this, but we've gone through massive natural disasters in parts of the world and, significant economic downturns, right? So we kind of got, both of those things happening to us, unfortunately, as a result of what's going on now. But I honestly do believe that as tough as it is to make it through, good causes survive times like this. It's not going to be easy, right? So if your tent is relevant and doing relevant work in your community, you just got to keep doing it, right? And you got to keep fighting for it, and you'll come out the other end, and everything will get better. So I believe that. I also think that one of the other things that I've learned is that for us locally, we're sort of what I would describe as a high cost, high value charity. So as much as absolutely we're trying to get things like monthly giving programs and recurring revenue streams going, our average donation here is close to $1,000. And so you think about the type of donor who's funding that. And, and you think about how they're doing now. Well, no one's doing well right now. But the reality is that people are making gifts that size or greater. They're doing it, to help organizations, but they're also doing it to not have to deal with the tax man a little bit too. And they're still going to need that incentive with the tax return at the end of their year, right? So we want to, a big part of why we don't want to go quiet in times like this is that if we were on a donors list already, if we're quiet right now, we're probably not going to be on their list. And then, yeah, again, the last point that Steve made around diversification of revenue, right? I agree. Yeah, I mean, we are fortunate that we started to diversify our revenue streams three years ago when I came on, but we're still not there yet. We're still not far enough along the road that something like this happens and there's no impact on us.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much for sharing. Heidi?
Well, I would certainly mirror all of these thoughts that have already been said. And I think for us, it's a lesson relearned perhaps of just how critical communication is, both between staff and our board so that we can remain nimble, but with the families that we serve so that we can be in tune with exactly what they need, with our community so that we know who and when is the right person to approach for a sponsorship or to come on board with us in some other partnership that we might have an opportunity for. But now is definitely the time to be really pursuing more intensified relationships and more communication and just checking in with our constituents and our colleagues and just really, really keeping those doors open and those channels open. We know that as professionals that communication is so, so critical, but this is really a lesson to be relearned as we find new ways to communicate and how does that look, and be really diligent at pursuing that even when it's from home or there are technology challenges or we're learning new things. I think every time we've reached out, it's been very welcomed, and that will be remembered, you know, that we took the time to do that and pursued deeper relationships. I absolutely think in the long run that will put us at an advantage.
That's great. Thank you. And then how about you, Richard?
Yeah, just pick up Heidi's point there. Look, what we've learned is people are amazingly generous. The ones that can give, do give. So that goes to, you know, the way we manage the relationships, reaching out to as many of them as we can. And then the ones, look, there are people certainly on our donor base that are also having tough times. So, you know, we've had some sponsors drop off. So our learning from that has been to make sure we stay in touch with them, empathize, and we've got an active program around maybe, you know, taking a payment holiday because they don't want to drop off, but they're just making a choice based on their own cash flows. So, you know, we've been quite active in, you know, whether it's payment holidays or reducing monthly premiums and subsidizing that through our own reserves. So that goes to, you know, just that people are generous. And if we can get the message out there and the need of people that aren't as fortunate, they give. So that's been our one big learning. I said earlier, you know, about just making sure, you know, our database is clean, properly segmented so that we can call the right people for the right reasons. And going back to something that was said earlier, you know, just this personal thing about calling people, phoning them, saying thank you has been really important. And that's sort of generated, and especially from our major donors, you know, that's generated quite a bit of money. And the last thing is just the power of collaboration. We've always tried to focus on this around our programs. So for argument's sake, in our winter program, we collaborate with Salvation Army at one end, Plunkett, who's an organization that looks after babies till 4 years old. We look after kids from 4 to 17. So it makes the decision of potential sponsors that much easier if you go to them with other organizations and present a sort of an overall solution, because, you know, our charity space is really crowded. So, you know, we've got a limited number of companies that are sort of obvious candidates to give. They're swamped with requests, and, you know, they then have to choose between people in the same thing, in the same sort of space, doing the same sort of thing. So this sort of power of collaboration is something we've really experienced. And in this time, it's been equally so. So that program that, again, with, you know, this crowd, Eat My Lunch, one of the big dairy companies, the insurance company, and just going to people and saying, look, we've put this coalition of partners together that is doing real good. And that's, you know, and it's producing, you know, a tangible outcome for the people in need. So that's kind of why you need to support us, because actually your money is going to the cause and we're doing it in concert with other, you know, really good organizations.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for the four for sharing some of your really great ideas. I think we've got some good ideas. Definitely this will be, this is recorded, so it'll be emailed out at a later date. We're also going to share some of the slides and resources that have come available so that everybody could take a look at them. We're going to send out an email with a link to our box and an invitation, and that way you can, all of our TED Talks will be hosted in that box, and any of the resources that come out of these TED Talks will also be hosted in that box. So we'll send an email out to everybody so that you have access to it, and feel free, if there's anything that does come up and along the way, you can send it to me and I'll put it in the box so that everybody can share those tools and resources. I would love to open it up. We have quite a lot of people on this talk, and just for, we were talking a little bit before, I think we were joking about happy hour and coffee in the morning, but I think it's a great time just to kind of, if there's any questions you have to the panelists, this is a great time to ask or just have a open conversation about anything that has been gnawing at you for a while as we're going through this pandemic. So I open it up for discussion, questions to the panelists, or anything you'd like to share. Lewis?
Well, first of all, I think this is just incredible. I am so inspired. I've heard so many great ideas today. So thank you, number one, Erica, for taking the lead of organizing this. And thank you to our speakers for sharing their ideas. I think it's just brilliant. I just wanted to throw out one little thing. It's not directly related to this, but I had the opportunity, Boys and Girls Club of the US had reached out to me, and they have 4,500 chapters in the US. And their challenge, I work with a whole bunch of groups sharing ideas and thoughts, and their challenge is that a lot of their clubs operate with little events. That's how they make their money. And of course, little events aren't going to be happening for quite a while. And so, one of the things that we were chatting about, and something that, a few of us maybe have thought about, maybe a few of us haven't thought about, like I know in California, they've got the big poker event coming up at the studios. I think it's scheduled for this summer. More than likely, no big events will be happening anywhere in the next several months. So how can you salvage that, and what can you do? And so one of the things that I'm working on right now is it's a virtual gala for 300, where restaurants are involved. So we're helping restaurants out, and they're making money, and the restaurants deliver the food to these 150 homes, okay? And then we're gonna have a program that's gonna be a virtual program where we'll have live entertainment happening from homes. And there's all kinds of things you can do with happy hour, and you can, do it for 100 people, for 200 people, depending on your tent and your resources, and you can keep it real simple doing it through Zoom. So I just wanted to throw that out in terms of, these are some really great big ideas, and what can we do as far as a virtual event in addition to what we've talked about. And the other thing is, along with the gala, you traditionally have an auction. So now thinking about people's needs or experiences or escapes, virtual experiences where you can hook on to different personalities or connections you may have, where no, you're not going to get them to go out for lunch for 2 hours, but you might get them to connect on a Zoom call for 15 minutes and have a coffee. And how unique and how experienced is that? People are looking for entertainment. They're looking to feel good. And so I think we can provide that along with our compelling messages. So those were just a couple thoughts I wanted to share, but I'm just so inspired by some of the things I heard today. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else like to share? I love that. Thank you, Lewis. There's Nancy. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I agree with Lewis's comments. I think this has gone really well. I do appreciate the four of you that have shared your ideas. And when you were talking about lessons learned, I didn't hear anybody speak up and say, have money set aside for a rainy day. Is that not part of your learnings, or do you already have money set aside for a rainy day? I didn't hear that come up, and I would think that would be a big lesson that was learned so we can keep our doors open.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started probably 3 years ago with zero pretty much in reserves, and we've built it up over the last few years. I can tell you, if this had happened 12 months ago, we'd be gone by now already. So yeah, we were building up to probably, we'd reached 6 months reserves. But to be honest, probably the one thing I've learned out of this whole thing is that that's no longer big enough. It's got to be big. We'll go back to virtually zero again. Our cash forecast is scaring the hell out of me at the moment, but we will virtually go. And you know, it's changed. I'm sure you guys are getting the same. It changes every week, every day, where you think you're going to be in a few months' time. But I think we'll be starting all over again, and that's the devastating part. We've worked so hard. Our team had worked so hard for 3 years to get us back to a point where we could sleep at night. And we're only commenting a few months ago around the office around, hey, how good is this? You know, look at our cash balance. How good is this? And now we're going to be back to zero, and it's so devastating because it's beyond everyone's fault. It's been no one's fault. It's out of our control. Starting all over again, but when we do get back up there, it's going to have to be bigger again.
Great. And
I could
Lewis.
add to that too, Nancy, Jeff. Again, we probably have at this point about 3 months reserves, but our plan is to try and make it through this without having to touch those reserves, and we'll see if we can do it. But I agree with Steve. Like that crystal ball that we used to gaze into, that you could see so far, and things look very clear. It changes all the time. So you know, even the notion of keeping staff on, right? We all hope optimistically that we get through this sometime in the short term. But what if what we're experiencing now prolongs for a longer period of time, right? All bets are off at that point.
yeah. Anybody else like to share? I'd love to hear those ideas. Thank you, Nancy, for bringing that up. That is saving for a rainy day is very, very important. We do have Neil, our treasurer, and who is all monies about everything. Neil, do you have any sort of, not to put you on the spot?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's something we measure every year in terms of the how much, I guess, rainy day fund tents have, and it varies enormously across all the tents. So I guess some of the tents will be in a better position than others, but like all these things, it's always quite complicated, because then some of that will be in investments, and the market will have gone down, and now is not the time to be trying to cash in your investments. But I think, Erica, the main comment I have, I'll relate it probably more to lessons from some other charities in Australia, and lessons from being involved with a regulator in Australia. It is very much what people have been talking about, that it's spending, I think people are spending a lot more of their time on the phone. You don't have the luxury of being in an office and walking down the hallway and having a quick conversation. So it's harder work. The message I keep hearing from people is people are working longer hours, even though they're working from home, and it is harder. But having those conversations are important. I know the last 2 days, I'm president of the National Trust in Australia, and I spent pretty much the whole of the last 2 days on the phone talking to people, talking to directors who are a bit worried, or talking to staff. And I'm probably all over the place here, but maybe go back to first principles. I know a couple of the speakers that have said this, and it's certainly something that we've done with a couple of the charities I'm involved with. One, most of our volunteers fall into the very high risk category. So the first thing was, we had to make sure everything we did looked after those people in high risk. So we had to try and look after our volunteers. Some of our volunteers struggle with that when we told them that, no, you can't come into the office and you can't do these things. But and there's a need to keep in touch with all your volunteers. So I guess we've put in place programs to make sure that we are in touch with our volunteers and talking to our volunteers and making sure that they're okay. I'm sure most of you are doing this with your staff. Some people go to daily meetings, or a meeting every 2 days. But it's very much about that personal communication. The email and the text is less relevant in this circumstances. It's very much about being on the phone and talking to people. But I think the bit that's been amazing is 2 of the organisations I've been involved with had appeals go out in early April, And so far for both of those, and it's early days, but the response has actually been higher than normal. And a couple of and the lesson that keeps coming through, and I think a lot of the speakers have talked about it, is if you've built relationships with your donors, then those donors are still keen to support you. And I know Philanthropy Australia is pushing that message very heavily, that all the philanthropists are saying, look, we're going to stick with the people that we've been supporting. So the message is, if you've got regular supporters and good supporters, then be in touch with them. And that's just a reinforcement of the same message that's coming through from many of the speakers. Yep. That's probably too much from me. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing. Anything else before we conclude? Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much again for the 4 panelists that were on today. It was very helpful and insightful to hear some of the fundraising events that you all are doing. Thank you. I see Sherry's big hand, a round of applause to everybody. Thank you very much. If you are inspired to come back and listen to what Great Britain and the UK and Ireland are doing, please join us for the one on the 28th. It'll be at 9 a.m. Los Angeles time. So please jump on if you can. We'd love to see your faces again and hear some of your questions and ideas as well. So as we close, I usually close with a great quote. So I'm taking from the quote of the day, and the quote of the day says, whatever is trying to bring you down is already below you. I don't know if that's fitting for what we're going through. This pandemic is bringing us down. We will rise up. And I think as a Variety community, we are a powerful, mighty group. Have children as the center of what we do. There's no reason why we can't come out this stronger and better. So I leave with that and wish you all really great successes.